Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'd be lying if I said Cassius Phazon hasn't kept me guessing from the very beginning. Every time I think I've finally figured out what kind of man he really is, General Hospital throws another twist my way that makes me stop and think again. That's exactly why I've been paying such close attention lately, especially now that it looks like his time on the show may be coming to an end. If there's ever going to be a moment that changes how fans remember him, I have a feeling it's coming sooner rather than later. The more I watch Cassius, the more I see a man who never truly found a place in the life he stole. Taking over Nathan West's identity gave him a chance to hide, but it never gave him peace. You can see it in the way he hesitates, in the choices he makes, and in the constant struggle between doing what's easy and doing what's right. Folks, that's not how a cold-blooded villain usually acts. That's how somebody behaves when they're carrying a burden that's getting heavier by the day. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to paint Cassius as some innocent soul. Far from it. He's made terrible decisions that have hurt a lot of people, and nobody should simply forget that. But I also can't ignore the little moments that keep piling up. Time after time, he found a reason to keep Jocelyn alive when letting her die would have solved plenty of problems for him. That tells me something was holding him back, something deeper than fear of getting caught. Then came the decisions that really caught my attention. Cassius spared Joe Fitzpatrick. He also let Ezra Boyle walk away when eliminating both men could have protected his biggest secret. I'll tell you, if the writers wanted us to see him as nothing more than another Ross Cullum or Jen Sidwell, those scenes never would have happened. Instead, they keep showing us a man whose conscience refuses to stay quiet, even after everything he's done. Of course, none of that wipes the slate clean. That's the part I keep coming back to. Cassius may have saved Jocelyn's life more than once, but he was also the one who set her nightmare in motion by kidnapping her in the first place. That's a contradiction that's hard to ignore, and honestly, I think the writers want us to wrestle with that. Life isn't always divided into heroes and villains, and neither is this story. The situation with James West might be the biggest clue of all. Sure, running away with the boy sounds reckless and completely misguided. But the more I think about it, the more it feels like the desperate act of a grandfather who genuinely cares about his family, even if he's making all the wrong choices. As folks like to say back home, the road to trouble is often paved with good intentions. Maybe that's exactly where Cassius has been walking all along. And then there's Liesl Obrecht. She has continued to believe there's still some goodness buried deep inside him, and I'll admit I'm starting to understand why. That doesn't erase his sins, but it does make me wonder if General Hospital is preparing one final chance for Cassius to prove that the man behind all those mistakes still has a heart worth saving. If that's where the story is heading, I think his final chapter could end up being far more emotional than most of us ever expected. The more I sit with this story, the harder it is for me to believe that Cassius is simply going to disappear and leave Jocelyn and Liesl Obrecht to deal with everything on their own. I completely understand why Jocelyn feels the way she does. If I had been kidnapped, lied to, and manipulated by the same man, I'd probably tell myself he wasn't worth another second of my trust either. Once someone breaks your faith that badly, it's only natural to expect the worst from them. But somehow, I keep coming back to the feeling that Jocelyn is about to discover she misjudged him one last time. What really catches my attention is how carefully the writers have been building Cassius over the past several weeks. They haven't treated him like a one-dimensional villain who's evil just for the sake of being evil. Instead, they've shown a man constantly battling with himself. Every time he had an opportunity to make the cruel choice, there was another part of him pulling in the opposite direction. That's not an accident. In my experience watching soap operas over the years, when writers spend that much time showing a character's inner conflict, they're usually preparing us for a defining moment that changes everything. I also can't ignore the promises Cassius made to Jocelyn and Obrecht. Those promises have stayed in the back of my mind because General Hospital rarely puts that kind of dialogue into a story unless it plans to revisit it later. Words alone don't mean much, especially coming from someone with Cassius's history, but keeping those promises could mean everything. If he truly intends to prove that he isn't the same desperate man who stole Nathan's identity, then this is his opportunity. He doesn't need another speech. He needs one courageous act that speaks louder than anything he could ever say. Then there's the situation with James, and I honestly believe that may become the turning point for Cassius. Watching Cody Bell stop the attempted kidnapping might force him to face a painful truth. He probably convinced himself that taking James away was somehow protecting the little boy, but deep down, he had to know he was repeating the same selfish pattern that created all this pain in the first place. Sometimes we become so desperate to hold on to the people we love that we stop asking whether we're actually helping them. I'll tell you, that's a heartbreaking lesson, and I think Cassius is finally beginning to understand it. If that's really what happens, I could easily picture him standing alone afterward, realizing just how close he came to destroying the one thing he claimed to care about most. That's the kind of moment that changes a person. Not because someone threatens them or forces them to change, but because they finally recognize themselves in the mirror and don't like what they see anymore. Those are the moments that always stay with me as a viewer because they feel honest. Real change doesn't happen because it's convenient. It happens because carrying the guilt becomes harder than doing the right thing. That's why I don't think Cassius's next move will be running away. In fact, I'd be surprised if he even considers it for very long. Running has been his answer for so long, but where has it gotten him? Every lie created another lie. Every escape made his life even more complicated. At some point, a man gets tired of looking over his shoulder. Maybe that's exactly where Cassius is now. Maybe he's finally reached the point where facing danger is easier than living with regret. The summer spoilers make me even more convinced that we're heading toward that kind of emotional payoff. The big question isn't whether Cassius can survive. The real question is whether the time he spent pretending to be Nathan actually changed him on the inside. That's a fascinating idea when you think about it. Living under another man's name may have started as deception, but perhaps somewhere along the way, Cassius began seeing what a decent life actually looked like. Maybe wearing Nathan's identity forced him to experience responsibility, family, and love in ways he never expected. Sometimes people accidentally become the person they only pretended to be. If that's true, then returning to Wyndemere would make perfect sense. I don't think he'd go back looking for forgiveness because some mistakes are simply too deep for that. Instead, I think he'd go back because innocent people are in danger, and this time he'd choose to put their lives ahead of his own. To me, that's what redemption has always been about. It's not asking everyone to forget the past. It's accepting the consequences while still choosing to do what's right. And then we have Spoon Island, where it feels like every road is leading. Whenever General Hospital starts bringing multiple major characters to one location, I know something unforgettable is about to happen. The tension keeps building, the stakes keep rising, and it feels like every decision from the past several months is finally coming together. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Cassius walks into that confrontation knowing full well he may never leave the island alive. Sometimes a character's greatest act comes when there's nothing left to gain personally. The image that keeps playing in my mind is Cassius putting himself between the hostages and the real danger. Not because he expects applause, not because he thinks everyone will suddenly forgive him, simply because for the first time in a very long while, he wants to save lives instead of protecting himself. Folks, if that isn't the definition of personal growth, I don't know what is. It wouldn't erase the kidnapping, it wouldn't erase the lies, the fear, or the pain he caused. Those wounds would still be there. But it would show that even someone who has fallen so far can still make one final choice worth remembering. That's why I'm looking forward to these upcoming episodes more than I have in quite a while. Cassius has always been one of those characters who keeps you arguing with yourself. One minute you want to see him pay for everything he's done, and the next minute you catch yourself hoping he doesn't waste the last chance he's been given. If the writers truly are setting up a redemption story, I hope they stay true to everything they've built. Let him earn it the hard way. Let him risk everything without expecting anything in return. In my book, that would make his farewell one of the most emotional and memorable exits General Hospital has delivered in a long time.